Okay, welcome back. We're going to look at measuring some walls today with the BIM Vision application, or at least the advanced reports plug-in to the BIM Vision IFC viewer that we've been working on in the last number of tutorials. We measured footings in the last tutorials, and now we're going to move on to standard walls or wall construction in the standard wall IFC entity. Before I do that, I want to draw your attention to this little icon here on the left hand corner of the types pane. Now just be aware, I'm going to click all my types and highlight everything there. Just be aware what this does. If I click that, hide inactive objects, what happens is if I click any one of those category headings, that category disappears completely from my view. So I want to get rid of slabs, I want to get rid of my walls and just show what is left. I want to get rid of element furniture, I want to get rid of stair flight, and just show what is in those panes. I would use that. Now I don't tend to use that, it kind of confuses issues a little bit, things disappear. But if that starts happening to you whereby you select an object entity or category and it disappears, it means that that has been kind of activated. What I'm going to do now is click back onto it, show everything, highlight everything again so that my checkbox, all my checkboxes are checked, and what I'm going to focus on is standard walls. So I'm just going to uncheck everything, check my standard walls. Now just to let you know, there can be a couple of categories, IFC entities of walls. There can be a standard wall category and there can be just a general IFC walls category. So walls can go in depending on how it's mapped in the mapping process. Don't ask me exactly why, but some walls go into standard walls and some walls go into the walls category. Now what happened in this particular mapping process, there is no walls category, it all went into standard walls. It can be a little bit frustrating because sometimes you'll see base quantities from the IXE export process in standard walls, and sometimes you won't see it in the walls category or vice versa. If you can remember from the last tutorial, we were using the comments parameter. So if I click a wall item here, let's say that rising wall there, it's kind of showing it, you can't see it exactly, but if I zoomed in there you would. That's it there. If I select it, and this is all the information that's in the category. If I scroll down, we had, I believe, a comments field where we had that 19 substructure. If I scroll down and select one of the basic block walls, that should change to 22 internal walls. We did that ourselves in the kind of pre-processing side of things. When we were in Revit, we added that particular code, that natural standard building elements, into that available fields. Now comments isn't necessarily designated as a parameter for your national standard building elements. It was an available field, there was nothing in it, we just selected it. It could have easily been the description parameter, it could have easily been a keynote, you could have inserted it as an assembly code, we could have generated it as a new parameter in Revit called National Standard Building Elements and assigned it to that. So there's a number of different ways you can do that, and I've showed you that in those video tutorials. So just be aware that it can depend when you get a Revit file, or excuse me, when you get an export from Revit or ArchiCAD, be it an IFC file or it could be a DWFX file. There may be some information in there in relation to quantity surveying, QSID, but most of the time there's not. You'll have to do this kind of processing in your 5D software. But it was worthwhile going through that process to show you how that could be, and if it's could be done, and if it's in there, it would be very beneficial in terms of filtering our information per the different national standard building elements. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to leave that as selected. Let's go back up, standard walls, make sure it's selected, and move on again to my reports. So click in advanced, click in plugins, click in advanced reports. You may or may not have some information in here already. If you have your foundations and you want to keep that kind of, let's say, that map, you can save it. Now I have something different in here. I was working on something previous or after. I had created the tutorial on foundations. So if I wanted to save this, and this was some sort of walls map, I would click save. Call it walls 1, 2, whatever you want. Call it walls mapping for warehouse, and just click save, and you can use that map again. We're going to kind of start a map or a mapping definition, or whatever you want to call it, a filtering or a coding structure with BIM Vision Advanced Reports from scratch again for the walls. So let's delete or remove what's here in the columns section, and let's delete what's here in the objects section. So I'm going to click remove. So there's nothing there, and there's nothing shown in preview. So there needs to be something in the columns here first. Let's throw a couple of things in. Double click the add row, and let's click, I don't know, something, materials. Okay, actually, just to make sure, click that show only available objects, otherwise you won't see a whole lot. I'm going to click IFC entity, and I'm going to click name. Okay, so make sure that's unchecked, otherwise you'll only see a couple of things here, which is fine, but to get them up initially, you're going to have to uncheck that little box. Click OK. Now I'll come back to that in a few minutes, but I'm going to start with my objects, and I want to select custom selector again, and I want to select what I am interested in this time around in terms of quantity extraction, and that is walls. Okay, so I'm going to add an IFC type, and I want it to either match or equal to, and I can drop down and I can select what my walls category is, and there it is there, wall standard case. So IFC equals wall standard case. Click my preview, and there we have pretty much all our different walls, be them internal, external, or underground in terms of your substructure. What I could do as well, if I just show you here, I could say IFC match, and instead of IFC the wall dropping down the wall standard case, I'm just going to select any IFC entity that has wall in it. So if I just click off that, you see it goes asterisk wall asterisk. The software is going to look for any, just click down, any of these IFC names that has wall in it. Now there is only one of them that has it, and that's IFC wall, so it'll select that. It'll do the same thing as it done before, but let's say there was two IFC entity types, with one with standard case walls and one with just the general walls. It would select both. Now I could still go IFC select standard case, drop down, and then R, click again, IFC equals, and select the other wall category. I don't need to do that if I put in that little wall. So hopefully, or little wall name, hopefully you're kind of getting a feel for that now. It just takes a bit of playing around with it. I've selected walls. It doesn't really matter where I'm selecting the entire IFC entity, or I'm sticking wall in there, because it'll search for any IFC type with that in it. Okay, so again, preview, and you can see that that's starting to shape up, but I don't have a whole lot of information in here just yet. I'm going to go back to columns. I only have an IFC entity and an IFC name. Now remember that you have to have something in there to preview, otherwise nothing comes up and you start getting a little bit confused. So that's why I put those two in there first, and then started doing my object selector. Okay, so I'm going to click add, and I might just show what's available again. Don't need to see everything. I only unchecked that because when there was nothing shown, there was nothing available. And you can see that the blue rows there are already selected, the IFC entity and the IFC name. So what else do I need? Well, I'm going to do my link to object again and scroll down. Let's say location. Why not take the story, whether the walls are on the ground floor, the top of foundations, whether they're on the first floor. That might tell me, depending on how it's drawn. I'm going to take all my base quantities. Why not? Height, length, net side area, net volume, width, gross floor footprint. Why not take the base quantities? See what comes out with the base quantities in terms of the exported IFC file. And I'm also going to take these dimensions. I've only got 3 of them. Let's say area, length, and volume. And these dimensions are the Revit parameters that are part of the dimension properties of the Revit file. And these quantities are base quantities calculated in the IFC export process. So as you can remember, as I said before, there's a few different ways or a few different types of quantities you can have when you open possibly a DWFX file or an IFC file. You could have the actual Revit parameters. You could have, as I said before, the base quantities which are generated on the export process, or you can actually have quantities that are kind of calculated on the import process. Now, there's not many applications that do that. More than likely, you only see 2 or 3 different types of dimensions, but there is 1 or 2 that I've seen before. But I'm just going to select pretty much everything I need there. I certainly also need to go down to my identity data. I can remember from my previous exercise that I put in my National Standard Building Elements in Comments. It could be that it's in Keynote in another project, so just be aware of that. And I also like taking the family and name. I also find that that's got a good name convention in it. And is there what's external, internal? You might see something like that in there. It doesn't pop up straight away. You could even take structural material. Is a handy one to take. So I think for the most part I can come back to it and check a few more items if need be, but for the most part I'm okay with that. So I'm going to click insert. So I've got everything I need. As I said before, you can group per objects here. So I could group by my IFC and by my story height. Then I could sum my volume. Let's go down to volume. Let's sum by this, and then kind of use this as a way of, I suppose, filtering your data if you're not exporting it to Excel. I find it easier, however, though, because when it does exports with these groups, is to not have any grouping done, because I'm going to use Excel to do it. I'm going to use Excel to sum the information I need, and I'm also going to use Excel to maybe add more object properties. Let's say add in, like I did the last time around, add in reinforcement or formwork, depending on what I need, and then if I have to move around some of these columns, I can do so. So let's go ahead and export that. So columns, preview, happy enough with that. I'm just going to scroll across, make sure there's information in a lot of these columns, and there is. And also make sure I've got my link to object in there. Don't worry about this merge identical rows, add column count, anything here. I think the default is okay. There is opportunity to start coloring up the model in terms of what you're selecting. Color up rising walls, color up internal block work, etc. I can show you that in another tutorial, but for the moment I want to get some quantities out, and I'm going to save that to a file. So walls, warehouse detailed, and yeah, let's save it in the same location that I saved it last. And this is kind of, I suppose, an Excel model map as such. It's going to open up, and here we have what we had before, except in this case it is walls. Okay, so next tutorial, let's take a look at what's come out here in terms of our Excel export. So we got the actual entity itself. It will all be IFC standard case, but as I said before, it could be just IFC walls. There is a category called IFC walls, and it just depends on how it's mapped. We've got the actual objects themselves, the object name. We've got the link to objects, which we'll look at in a second. The story here, top of foundations, so walls that are in the foundations. Or that I'd imagine are rising walls, walls that are on the ground floor, walls that are on the first floor, and walls that are maybe on the parapet, okay, on the top floor. We got a gross footprint area in terms of base quantities. We got a height, we got a length from the base quantities, we got a net side area from the base quantities, and net volume. Now you'll notice what's going on with some of these base quantities. Is they're bringing in a kind of a millimeter squared as well as a meter squared. Okay, so let me be looking at that first, net side area, and look at it in comparison to the actual Revit dimension parameter, which is the area under dimensions, and see if it corresponds, and it looks like it does. 9.67, 9.67, 4.26, 4.26, 1.466, and so on. And I might just spot check just to make sure that they're matching, and they are. So I'm happy enough with my area, so I'm going to delete that one. There's no need for it to be there to be confusing matters. A volume, for example, let's just double check. Again, volume seems to be matching, so I don't need 2 of the same thing, so I'll delete that base quantities. because otherwise I have to delete the millimeters squared part of it or cube part of it. Length, let's take a look at the length. We've got length based quantities, and we've got a length Revit dimension property, and it looks like some of them are the same and some of them are different. So which is correct? As I said before, I don't necessarily trust as much as the other quantities. I don't trust the length quantity for objects such as foundations on walls as much as I do things like areas, volumes for those same objects. The reason being is because it kind of depends on how it's joined. You could have a length of a foundation where part of one side of the foundation is a little bit longer than the other, depending on how it's joined to a pad. So just be careful with how the length is coming in there. I generally check or double check some of those lengths. So let's say, for example, I've got two length properties there, 6324.6 and 6697. So they're millimeters, or 6.3 and 6.6. What object is that? It is this rising wall. So let's take a look at it, click it. That should link now back to my, just going to collapse that, my BIM dimension. And there it is. A better view would be from the bottom. So that's it there. Let's do a quick measure on this. Back to measurement, click length, edge, and one of the edges 6.235. So just checking back on my walls, 6.325 or 6,324.6 in terms of the fraction there, decimal places. It looks like the base quantities, now I could check a few of them just to get it right, is correct, and yet the length dimension that usually should be correct coming out of the Revit parameter is not, for whatever reason. Now logically, depending on how successful the architect is and how good they are as a modeler in Revit, none of these really should be different. They all should be the exact same, whether they're calculated from base quantities or whether they're calculated from a Revit parameter, or they are a Revit parameter, dimension parameter. They should be the same, but sometimes they're not, and you just got to make sure that you validate it and see which one is which one is correct. So I'm going to use the length base quantities instead of the length dimensions, because I have a funny feeling that that one is correct, and well, I checked it there and is correct compared to the Revit one. So delete that. As I said, volume is okay, area happy enough with, width, length, height, and then gross footprint area. I don't really need that. That's the footprint that the wall makes on the surface, rather than the actual wall area itself. So it's the footprint it makes on a floor, for example. So it'll be the length times its width. I don't need that. That's not a measurement I use for walls, so I'm going to delete that. Okay, so I'm pretty much happy enough with my dimensions. Again, remember, some could be in millimeters, some could be in meters squared. I've got a structural material, and I've got the name, my family and type name, which is a good one to have because it doesn't include the actual numbers itself, individually dividing up I suppose the objects into different numbers, which IFC does in terms of an export. And I am going to go ahead and do a pivot table for this, but before I do, I might do a little bit of tidying up. I could leave that. I'm going to delete this row here that says whether it's base quantities or whether it's dimension properties or whatever, and also the one below it and the one below that. And the reason I do that is because if I leave them in, I get these kind of blank rows when I filter for a pivot table. So I'm going to delete them, delete rows, and I'm going to highlight what I want my pivot table to entail. Scroll down and click insert. If you can remember from the last time, click pivot table. Hopefully you're getting more familiar with this. Like any piece of software, it takes a while. You might do it a few times to get a feel for it. You might change things around. It just takes a little bit of time to develop, I suppose, the aptitude in utilizing any piece of software. you'll probably find the more kind of software you use, be it Costex or even BIM Vision, the more you kind of work with BIM models, the more familiar you become with how this information is put together. So I'm going to click Insert, Pivot Table. I'm going to use a new sheet, so click OK, and I'm going to create my pivot table. So I don't need all this information, all these fields, even though that's what I brought into my Excel sheet. I could actually go ahead and delete some of it if need be, but why not just take in what I need? I'm going to start with the comments, because that's what tells me what's internal, what's external, and what's substructure. So drop that down into rows, and I can see this is divided into element 19, element 21, 22, 90. So I'm going to use those main headings. Below that then I might use the name. I actually won't use name because, as I said before, that has a number to it, so watch what happens. It divides it into a load of numbers. So I want those to kind of group together, so I'm going to use the family and type name, which is the same without the numbers, so that actually looks a little bit better. So now I've got my rising walls and substructure, I've got my external walls, I've got my internal walls, and I've actually got my site walls in there as well. I could even stick in the structural material if need be, and pretty much all masonry concrete blocks. We probably don't need that in there. I can keep that for my description in my BOQ or my cost plan rather than adding complexity here. From, I suppose, a quantity takeoff perspective, what do I need? I certainly want the area, and I want it to be the sum of the area. If it's coming in as a count, you need to go to value settings and select sum. Okay. I want possibly my volume. I won't need volume in this case now, but why not put it in there anyway, because it's masonry wall construction, always measured as meters squared on the surface area rather than volume, which might be if it's a concrete wall. And maybe I'll stick the length in as a sum. Now, why would I need the length? Well, if I was measuring per the NRM, it might be walls measured per length with a designated height, but I'm going to stick it in there just to have it anyway. For the most part, it's the area I need, and it's measured in meters squared, so why not stick that at the top. The sum of my volume is meter cubed, and the sum of my length is it meters or millimeters? It could be millimeters. I'm just going to leave it as millimeters. Okay, if I click back on any number there, that pivot table will come up, and I can play around with this if need be, just to see what happens if I add story to between comments and family there. So now it's going to divide all my I suppose my walls into what is ground floor or what is first floor, so that's quite handy if you need that information. So I've stuck the story field in between the comments and family name. If I put it below the family name, it would change it, to a different orientation. So that's what I'm saying about kind of playing around with the data. This is essentially a database from the Excel spreadsheet, and we're creating different orientations of that data. And that's essentially what building information modeling is all about. It is a database. So it's becoming familiar with that database and how to extract information. Excel is a fantastic tool. If these products export into Excel, export your information into Excel and maybe do some of your quantification in there. So that is, for the moment, walls construction. So I would save that to wherever in your folder, wherever you want, and let's try something else in the next tutorial.